Hello and welcome to the Walk Off, everybody. I'm Scott Belfort and very excited about today's episode because we have a very special guest returning. Excited to have back on the show, digital sports editor with Post Media, Toronto Blue Jays aficionado, Rob Wong. Welcome back to the Walk Off, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, it's great to be back, Scott. It's been a while. I know you've reached out on several occasions to get me on, and I tried to make it work, but our schedules just never worked out. So it's nice to be back and good time to be chatting. A lot of stuff going on after not a slow off season, maybe moves wise, but there's been a ton of rumors, a ton of chatter, but we're finally starting to see some transactions, which everybody
Well,
loves.
it's kind of funny, Rob, because honestly, the timing of the Santander signing could not have come at a better moment. I mean, the truth is, the offseason was feeling pretty bleak. And after going through, and I don't know how you did with the Roki Sasaki stuff, because I promised myself I wasn't going to get invested. I'm like, you can't fool me twice. And then, of course, as soon as they traded for Miles Straw, I was 100% in. And I'm like, we're getting Sasaki. And then I had to deal with that heartbreak all over again. So Santander definitely what's the best way to put it? Like really a needed signing. He fits so many of the holes they had. Finally, they've got a switch hitter. Finally, they've got a cleanup guy and kind of a fun dude, right? The more you find out about his personality and stuff, you're like, Toronto's gonna love this guy.
Yeah, it really does seem that way. And hand up, I'll be the first one to say that at the start of the offseason, I wasn't the biggest fan of Anthony Santander being a Blue Jay signing. Now, I think a few things played into that. Just based on the reports that were out there, there were concerns that, maybe the Blue Jays didn't have a ton of money to spend. And for me, I was thinking, well, maybe it's better to go some other routes and, pick some other players that might fit this lineup a little bit better than spending it all on one guy with a career on base around 300. Yes, he hits homers, and everybody loves that, of course, but I don't think anybody believes he's the perfect player. He does have his flaws, but considering what we've seen and considering the reporting that's going on right now, where it seems as though maybe the Blue Jays do have some cash to throw around to get Anthony Santander for the price that they did, especially, I don't think anyone can look at this deal and not think it's pardon the pun, but a home run.
Especially when you look at the deferrals and how this is going to hit the CBT at only 14 million a year, which really, when you look at what was predicted for Santander, and I know you kind of touched on that. I mean, there were numbers thrown out at 5,120, 6,150. So, I mean, would you chalk this up to his market kind of fell out on him?
Yeah, I think it has to be. I mean, you look at the teams around Major League Baseball that have been active so far this offseason. It's really just been, the Dodgers, the Mets, of course, have made their moves with Juan Soto, the Yankees adding some pitching, but not a ton of these big bats have gone anywhere. I mean, we're still waiting for Pete Alonso, and I'm sure we'll, get into that coming up later. But it doesn't seem like these players who, as we touched on with Santander, have some flaws. It doesn't seem as teams are willing to meet those asking prices, even for an Alex Bregman, who reportedly is, looking for $200 million. I'm not sure how many teams are interested in throwing that out for a guy who's been an incredible player for his career. But it seems as though teams are being pretty cautious right now with the type of money that they want to spend. Maybe they feel there's going to be some bargains as we get closer to spring training. So as you touched on, the deferrals really changed the things for Anthony Santander and especially for the Blue Jays as their CBT numbers continues to climb. And I was always thought that maybe Santander would be looking for 20+ million dollars, and I think maybe that was another reason why I didn't see the Blue Jays as a fit. But the fact that they were able to get that number down so much obviously changed the equation when it came to his fit with this team. And when you look at this lineup, sorely needed. Of course, they've needed pop for a while. They've needed more power in this lineup. So we'll see where he ultimately slots in if there's more moves to come. But as I said before, I just don't know how you can not look at this move and think it's a good one for a team that desperately needed more offense, and they're getting it in a guy who had 44 home runs last year.
It's been a really intriguing off season. And I mean, for Blue Jays fans, it's been tough. But as an outsider, like if you're just not a Blue Jays fan and you're watching the way Ross and Mark are operating, it has been kind of interesting because they obviously have money. They had their major targets. They were in on Soto. They went hard after Burns, and I truly believe probably outbid Arizona if you're going to see the numbers. And it just, sometimes players want what players want and want to go home or whatever it is. But I don't feel like they have hard targets anymore, but they're kind of waiting to see if maybe they can get a bargain with this market. And honestly, as a fan, I hate that. I honestly do. But we're starting to see maybe the fruits of that labor starting to appear. I know that anyone who's been on Twitter today is well aware that all of the rumors and pundits are starting to say that the Toronto Blue Jays make the most sense for Pete Alonso. And then on top of that, there's rumors that, well, if Pete Alonso gets signed, maybe Max Scherzer sees the Toronto Blue Jays as a desirable place to spend his last year. What do you think the strategy was to start with? Do you think this was always kind of what Ross and Mark had in mind? And obviously, like a guy like me, I'm just a dummy guessing at numbers and what they can spend. Like, I don't know anything, right? But they do seem to have had their targets and now they're moving on and waiting for the market to develop.
Yeah, look, I think when you look at the names that you touched on, that they were interested in, at least when it comes to a guy like Corbin Burns, to what varying degree on Juan Soto, how high they got as far as the offer, differing reports on that. But it's pretty clear that they had interest in those players, and I'm sure in a perfect world they would have loved to landed at least one of those guys. I think the interesting way to look at it with this front office and this off season. In the past, they've been sort of seen as people that have maybe misread the market. I think infamously of the Kendrys Morales deal.
Yeah.
Everybody likes to point at that one. That who are you competing against to give Kendrys Morales that contract? And ultimately they did, and unfortunately it didn't work out. But it really does seem as though this off season they've got a pretty good handle on what teams are interested in what players and who's potentially going to be out there. There's a lot more options, this offseason compared to last offseason when it was really Shohei Ohtani or bust. I mean, after they didn't get him, you saw what they ultimately had to work with. And unfortunately, it was Justin Turner, it was Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who was good,
Yeah.
but, not exactly the big game changing impact players that you would have hoped they would have signed last off season. So I think that has definitely stood out to me. I know it's been tough, even just as an outsider myself, just sort of watching this and the slow burn of it all. And now we're finally getting to the point where the moves are happening. It hasn't been easy for people that are fans of this team or observers of this team to sort of wait. But as you said, they're sort of yeah. I think I've seen other people kind of equate it to if you're a fantasy sports player, in an auction draft, you're that person that in the later rounds has all the cash, and now
Hmm.
people only have $1 to bid on someone, and you've got five, and that's kind of where the Blue Jays find themselves right now, where they've got a lot of money left to spend, maybe not a ton, but they've got enough to land some of these impact players, whether it's a Pete Alonso, whether it's a Max Scherzer, maybe another major league bullpen arm. So they've put themselves in a really good position here where they don't seem to have a ton of competition, at least as far as what we're seeing there with what baseball insiders are saying, and that's a great spot to be in because they've got the leverage right now. So as teams see, or as free agents see what the Blue Jays are doing here with Anthony Santander, Jeff Hoffman, the destination starts to look a little bit more appealing too, with players that are maybe looking for a dance partner before spring training.
Especially when you look at the landscape and realize, you know what? Like, it's not scraps that are left over. Like, there are
Mm-hmm.
some really talented, impactful players that are still on the market. And the Blue Jays, like you said, are kind of in a position to take a swing at that. It's funny, my man. I've thought about you numerous times throughout this offseason because I know what a
Oh
big
no, is this good
basketball.
or bad?
This is good. This is good. I know you're a big basketball guy, and I know you're a big baseball guy, and it just makes me laugh when I think about how different those two off seasons are and how fast free agents move in the NBA and how it's just like as a fan, there's no excitement in the baseball off season. It's just like we wait around until January, or at least that's what it's been the last few years, and hope things pick up.
Yeah, it is really unfortunate. I mean, you even look at the NHL where, they sports networks legitimately have a free agent day. And it's, hey, this is the day where all the agreements, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, are being signed. But yeah, maybe baseball needs to get to a point where they sort of have a free agent day. It's difficult to sort of make everyone, there's so many players, it's so difficult to make
Mhm.
everyone, especially some of the top guys sign right away. But it's kind of unfortunate how things have morphed into the way that they are in the current state of the game, where you've got so many players still unsigned that are looking for homes, and we're 3 weeks, less than almost 3 weeks away from spring training. So it's too bad that it's become the norm where you're hoping that your baseball team does stuff around the winter meetings, and then the winter meetings pass, and you're thinking, okay, maybe first couple of weeks of January, and still nothing. And here we are, into the final weeks of January, and finally things
Spring
are
training's
starting to
coming. Yeah.
spring training's coming around. So I can't imagine it's too fun for the players themselves to be going through this. You would like to have a little bit more, certainty and know what's going to be happening in 3 weeks, and where you're going to be going. But it's tough for baseball fans, and I think it's tough for the game to be really having it drawn out this way. Maybe that's the way baseball wants it, though. There's interest in the game from November to February during the off season, but I'm not sure what the solution is. It's really tough though to kind of force fans to go through this over and over again.
That's a great point. I don't know what the solution is. And I mean, the CBA is coming up. We don't need to dive too much into that, but there could be an impasse coming shortly. And we will dive back into the Blue Jays here, Rob, but I am curious on your thoughts on the Los Angeles Dodgers because I mean, my God, there is so much. Don't blame the Dodgers, blame the other 29 organizations out there kind of rhetoric uh, without any sense of nuance. And I think there does need to be a little nuance in that statement, right? There's got to be a happy medium, I feel like, between the Los Angeles Dodgers spending $400 million. I know they're just under that right now for this upcoming CBT with like over $1 billion deferred and the Pittsburgh Pirates, right? Like there's got to be a medium. Is there or where are you at on that? What are your thoughts on the Dodgers and do you kind of agree with some of the rhetoric of like listen, don't get mad at the Dodgers, get mad at the other 29 organizations who refuse to spend?
Yeah, I think, it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I've seen some people talking about the fact that the Dodgers and the way that they defer the money, the fact that it, does lower their CBT tax.
Mhm.
I mean, that is obviously a way that, if you get to a point where you can't do that, then, that makes things a little bit more challenging, of course. I mean, the Blue Jays just did it with Anthony
Yes,
Santander.
they
So,
did.
it's a tool that teams are using, and it's legal right now under the CBA. So I can't blame teams for doing it. I think the way I've been looking at it is really just from the player's perspective. I think the Kirby Yates agreement that we saw the other day, even Tanner Scott to a certain extent, it was pretty clear what's going on here. I mean, you look at a guy like Kirby Yates, he's what, 37, 38 years
Yeah.
old, has really never sniffed the playoffs. This guy just wants to be in the playoffs and have a
Yeah.
chance at a World Series. He doesn't know how much time he's got left. Tanner Scott is a guy who obviously got a lot of money, but also gets a chance to play with one of the best teams in the league. Players just want to win. Players want an opportunity to, hoist that trophy at the end of the season. And there's one team right now that gives you the pathway, I should say, of least resistance, and that is the LA Dodgers. And it's not even a case of you're getting all the money in the world, but you hear players talk about the resources that they have there, the way they treat their players, the clubhouse, and sort of the camaraderie that goes on there. I mean, it's just a top-notch organization. It's arguably the best organization in all of baseball. I don't even know if you can argue it at this point with the amount of players that they keep bringing in, and what players are saying publicly. So until you get to a point where the Dodgers maybe feel, like you said, are sort of punished, and maybe it's not to their advantage to do what they're doing, then yeah, then we'll maybe see a shift the other way. When it comes to other teams and owners not spending money, I mean, that's just the unfortunate part of sports in general. I mean, you look around all sports, even
Yeah.
ones, with salary caps, there's teams that, aren't spending to the top. They just want to get to the floor. And you've got owners that are treating their teams like businesses. That's kind of the unfortunate part for a lot of these things. So I don't know if there's a perfect solution. Once again, that's way out of my knowledge of, how you could fix all this. I think the one thing that might work in teams' advantages is you look at this Dodgers rotation, they're pretty locked up for a while. So, unless there's some major injuries and guys are set to miss seasons, you've got this massive starting five already with Snell, Otani, Yamamoto, Sasaki, and Glasnow. If you're Dylan Cease heading into free agency next year, you're not going to the Dodgers.
Yeah.
So, that opens the door for other teams to, sign a guy like him. You look at, maybe in a different time period where a guy like Max Scherzer or a Justin Verlander, maybe those type of guys would be signing a 1 year deal with the Dodgers, but they don't have room for those guys. So that is sort of maybe the silver lining here, that the Dodgers have a lot of these guys locked up for a long time, and players that are going to be free agents in the next couple of years won't be able to just sign with the Dodgers because the playing time is not going to be there. So that's sort of my optimistic take here, is that they can't take everybody because certain free agents need playing time and they won't be able to get it in Los Angeles.
You made a couple really good points there. I think one thing that does get lost in all of the money they're spending and all of the deferrals and all of this is that the Dodgers are a really good team. And of course, it's desirable for players to go there. I know that even Teoscar Hernandez was on a podcast recently where he was saying, yeah, I'm not going to go elsewhere over a little more money or maybe an extra year, which did make me think, you know what? Maybe there was an extra year out there for Teoscar and a little more money. And he's like, you know what? I'm good with my World Series ring and 66 million over the next three. Like there is that appeal to winning. And I also did like that you say, you know what? They can't sign them all, right? Like there is a finite number on that roster, and their pitching staff is looking pretty darn good. So you kind of got to roll with it. And you're right, man. Like, next year is going to be interesting. That is one little nugget I did not think about, Rob, and I really like that you brought that up. It's just like, yeah, the Dodgers are probably going to be pretty quiet in free agency next year. Where are they going to put any more players?
Yeah, well, I think what you have to hope if you're Major League Baseball is that other teams don't start doing this, and then the
Mhm.
last thing you want is two or three teams that are all operating the same way, and then you've got the Mets who are trying to do this. They obviously threw an insane contract at Juan Soto, but for whatever reason, they didn't feel like pulling a Dodgers and bringing Pete Alonso back, at least for the time being, or going out and trying to sign an Anthony Santander. Like they've got holes too, and Steve Cohen's got the money, but they have decided to not pull an LA Dodgers for whatever reason. So maybe that's sort of a good sign that some other owners in the league haven't just decided to go crazy like they have in Los Angeles. But yeah, I think it's just a situation where it's just so rare. Like I can't even think of another situation where we've seen something like this with the Dodgers. We've seen other teams sort of, I don't want to say circumvent the cap, but you look at the Golden State Warriors when they got Kevin
Yeah,
Durant. Like that only happened because of a crazy circumstance with the salary cap. You've seen the NHL teams, putting guys on long-term injured reserve, and then
right.
they take on some big contracts to load up for the playoffs. But even when the Yankees were at their highest powers, they weren't doing this. You look at those
No.
Yankees rosters. There's a lot of homegrown guys. Sure, they added some big free agents, but there were still some not very good players playing a lot of games, everyday players for those Yankees teams. But you look at this Dodgers team right now, and the rotation is absurd. The bullpen is absurd. You've got Betts, you've got Freeman, you've got Otani, you've got Teoscar. Tommy Edman was phenomenal last year. Like this is possibly the greatest collection of talents. I won't say it's the greatest team I've ever seen because they still haven't
That is
stepped on
yet
the
to be
field.
seen,
But
but I'm with you. Yeah. Just
it's crazy what this team looks like.
does make me happy that we're in the American League, my friend. So,
Absolutely.
so let's talk the Blue Jays a little bit more here. I know that news just was announced today that Christian Bettencourt and Richard Lovelady, so left-handed reliever and Lovelady, and probably the backup catcher to Alejandro Kirk and Bettencourt were signed to minor league deals. We don't need to spend too much time on this, but I am curious about the catching position and your thought on Bettencourt, and if you think that that's probably the reason they brought him in, is they just view him as more valuable than Tyler Heineman, who is kind of slotted, I guess, more or less to be the backup guy behind Kirky. Um, d- a few things that I want your opinion on. Number one, do you think Kirk has it in him to catch 100 to 110 games? How do you think he holds up in a full season? Because this is going to be the first time where he's really tested. And Christian Bettencourt, do you like the move?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start backwards. Christian Bettencourt, a guy that had a pretty good cup of coffee there with the Cubs
Mm-hmm.
last season as their backup, put up some big power numbers in a short span of time. He's a guy that obviously throws pretty hard, so he can control the running game from behind the plate. But I think it's just a situation where the Blue Jays are bringing in some more competition here. Maybe he's got the leg up on a Tyler Heineman because of what he showed last year in that short stint with the Cubs. But I think for me, that's what I was expecting coming into the offseason, that
Yeah.
the Blue Jays would be bringing in these types of, journeyman players to sort of, compete for the backup spot with Alejandro Kirk as the everyday starter. I know some people throw out Yasmani Grandal as an option. He
Mm-hmm.
probably costs a little bit too much. And, backup catcher, I know people love to obsess over it, but it's not exactly a position that, you're wanting to throw a ton of resources into. So, Betancourt is just some nice depth. And then, I imagine maybe they'll bring in maybe one other guy to compete for that spot potentially too. But when it comes to Alejandro Kirk, I remember reading some reports that he was in some pretty good shape this offseason. He's done a really good job of that. I think, last year that maybe wasn't the case. I don't know if he's ever going to be a guy that's, playing a full workload. I just think that's a guy whose body you want to make sure is feeling good, and you don't want him to, be in a situation where he gets injured. He's been injured, of course, in the past. As we
Mm-hmm.
just touched on with guys like Bethencourt and Heineman. Those aren't the guys you want playing more often than not. So, in the past, we also saw Alejandro Kirk as the DH, and depending on what moves the Blue Jays may do here, I probably don't foresee that as well. I mean, unless they get to a situation where some of these guys are injured, I don't think we'll see Alejandro Kirk as the DH, and then you've got Christian Bethencourt as the starting catcher. I think they really want to make sure Kirk is as healthy as possible, and just giving him as much rest as he needs. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to see him this year. I mean, he had some moments last year where he didn't look great, but he had some moments where he looked like the Alejandro Kirk that we saw in the first couple of years. We know how
2022,
good
yeah.
he is behind yeah, we know how good he is behind the plate. His throwing got really, really good last year, which I think was a surprise for a lot of people because it was there wasn't too long ago where it felt like he couldn't throw anyone out.
Yeah.
It's a situation where you look at the projection systems, and they're projecting him for a pretty good season. So I think the Blue Jays definitely feel good about his prospects heading into next year. But it's for me really a situation where you've got to keep this guy healthy because beyond him you just have no depth. And it's crazy to think that just a few years ago, it was Kirk, Jansen, Gabriel Moreno, and you're thinking, wow, that is an incredible trio
Yeah.
to have for the next 4 or 5 years. And here we are. There's only one guy left, and he's only got 2 years left before he's a free agent. So time is flying.
Wow. You know what's funny, Rob, is I knew Kirky had 2 years left, but I'd never heard it said out loud before. And it's just kind of hitting me that, oh my God, like all these controllable young catchers we had, which felt like just yesterday, they're all growing up and elsewhere now. So that's interesting that Kirk is I feel like he's poised for a good year. Like I'm trying to maintain my expectations because I still don't think that this team is good enough. But there are reasons to be excited about everyone's favorite term, positive regression. Like, I really do think Kirky and Bichette could be big for this 2025 team beyond what the current fan base is seeing possible, right? Like, it's easy to remember recency bias, right? It's easy to remember the bad times, and it's easy to ignore a guy like Bichette's first 3 or 4 seasons in the league, right? Because he was so bad last year and just couldn't stay on the field. And Kirky had that big 2022 and then just wasn't that guy. So, my question to you is, if they go into spring training as is right now, I don't feel it's enough, but I'm curious your opinion. And if you don't feel it's enough, is there a guy or two out there that you like more than some of the other options?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Is right as it stands right now, this lineup and this team probably isn't good enough. You know, you just look at the additions that they made. Santander has, is a nice piece, of course. Andres Jimenez is going to be all world when it comes to the defense, but he's not much on the offensive side. You know, maybe they get a little bit more out of him than they did a year ago. If they do, then that's an unreal trade. I mean, it's a great trade to begin with. I think to bring in a guy with his type of
I
defense
like
and
it
his
too.
type of floor.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's phenomenal. No offense to Spencer Horwitz, who was great for the Blue Jays
of
last year.
course.
I make this trade 100 times out of 100. You've got a situation right now where third base is up in the air. I know Ernie Clement was really solid for this team last year, but it was just one year. Can he repeat it? Dalton Varsho unlikely to be ready for April. So you've got a hole in center field. Is that Joey Loperfido? Is that someone else internally? Will Wagner, where's he playing at this point? So
Hmm.
the way I look at this roster is if you just threw Anthony Santander into last year's team, is this team that much better? Probably not. So I think they're still in a situation where they need to add, and according to Ross Atkins when he spoke at Santander's news conference the other day, they're working on it, and I believe it. We've seen a lot of the reports, of course, about Pete Alonso, and I think for me that's probably the guy. I know Jurickson Profar's name, has been thrown out there a bit too, and he could be a fit. I mean, if Blue Jays sign him, I don't think it'll be a bad move by any means. That's a guy
Hmm.
though who's coming off a career year, a year we've just never seen out of him. He is a former number one prospect in all of baseball, so he's got that pedigree. But I would have concerns. How
Yeah,
legitimate was the season that he put up a year ago? He did a lot of things that would suggest it's real, but can he repeat that? I'm not too sure. Pete Alonso, on the other hand, just like Anthony Santander, has some flaws, but at least he's got a track record of performing at the major league level pretty much since he stepped foot on the field as a New York Met. So I just think it would be cool to see him, and it would make the lineup so much more formidable to have potentially a 2-3-4 or a 3-4-5 of him, Santander, and Vladdy. I mean, around the American League, I'm not sure how many trios can compete with that.
hmm,
To be honest with you, so if there's one guy I'm circling, it's probably Pete Alonso at this point. And I'm not predicting anything. I don't have any inside knowledge, but it just feels like there's too much smoke when
yeah.
it comes to this whole Pete Alonso thing. It's not like the Juan Soto stuff. It's not like the Corbin Burns stuff, or even the Anthony Santander stuff. Like there's just something about this that feels, not that it's set in stone, but it feels like okay, it's only a matter of time before this comes down the pipeline that we hear about a Pete Alonso signing. And if it doesn't happen, then I'm going to have egg on my face. But I'm curious how you feel about it.
Well, I would love Alonzo. Pete's kind of the guy that I've got circled too. I know you brought up Jurickson Profar, and that's another guy that I would love in this lineup for a few reasons. Although all of the detractors that you brought up, well aware of, and it is kind of a little bit of a scary endeavor, especially because I think he's probably going to need a little bit of term. He's probably after at least 3 to 5, and I don't know on a 1 year guy, where he finally proves himself at 30. It's dicey, but I do like that he's another switch hitter, something that the Blue Jays have not had in years. And to have all of a sudden two of them where you can kind of flip flop depending on what pitcher's on the mound at the time. I really like that. So yeah, Profar and Alonso are kind of the guys that I would love to see added. It does make me wonder though, and I will throw the ball back to your court here because if they do add one of these guys, Rob, it means that there's pretty much one roster spot left for Will Wagner, Davis Schneider, Ernie Clement, Joey Loperfido, um, Jonathan Clase. I mean, you know what I'm getting at. The list goes on and on of those kind of 4A guys where it's like these dudes need at bat to continue to develop and continue to progress. And there's so many of them. I don't, there, not only do I not know if there's room on the Blue Jays roster for them all, I don't even know if there's room in AAA with the Bisons for all of them. Do you think a trade's inevitable?
It feels that way. I think, as you said, you look at AAA, you've got guys like Alan Roden, who a lot of
Yeah.
people are high on, of
Roden
course.
and
Like,
Barger, I forget. Yeah, right.
yeah, Roden, Barger, Torota, and like
Yeah.
Robertson, like all these guys in AAA that need at bats. So those guys aren't going back to Double A, that's for sure. So it's crazy though that you're in a situation where a year ago you had a lot of playing time for the Will Wagners and the Spencer Horowitzes and the Addison Bargers and Joey Loperfido, and all of a sudden you add a Andres Jimenez and you add an Anthony Santander, and it just kind of puts the depth back to where it was. And I think, trying to read the tea leaves of what Ross Atkins was saying the other day about, we have great depth at AAA. They obviously do now with the acquisitions that they've made, kind of pushing everybody down a slot. But yeah, I think just overall, it does feel as though another move has to be made. You want to make sure guys like David Schneider and Addison Barger, Jonathan Clase are getting, at bats and meaningful at bats. So I'm sure they've looked at this too and looked at the depth chart and figured out, which guys that they want to proceed with. So yeah, it does feel as though a trade is coming down the pipeline at some point here. So it's tough because there were moments where you thought maybe David Schneider could be a part of this future, and maybe he still could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he's got a lot of fans in the city, of course, a lot of fans in this country. People love the story, people love the player, but the Blue Jays are in a situation here where they're just out of chairs and they've got too many people. And maybe he's a guy that could be on the move. Maybe it's an Addison Barger as well. Will Wagner, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it would be tough, I think, to move him just because it seems like the Blue Jays are pretty high on him, and he obviously showed quite a bit. You could argue, though, because his value is a lot higher now, teams have seen him perform at the major league level.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the time to move a guy like him who's, he's not 21 years old. He is, 26 already. So he's kind of in that Spencer Horwitz mold of, a guy who's a lot older than you would think, despite his, professional experience. But the Blue Jays got some options here. I think that's what's good as well. That they have some pieces that they could move out. Maybe they grab another starting pitcher that way if they don't want to do it in free agency. Maybe they grab another reliever. They seem to have
Mm-hmm.
some potential options here. But I think I'm with you. It just doesn't seem as though there's enough room for everyone.
Now, I can see a world where maybe they do hold on to most of them. For the depth is great. And the fact that a bunch of these guys have had their major league debuts already and got a cup of coffee and a taste of what Major League Baseball is about does bode well for knocking on wood here. Any injuries that may happen throughout the year to have a guy who can step in, who's been there, done that. Not a bad place to be in, but I think by the trade deadline, something has to give, whether it's the direction of this organization, God forbid, turns to the worst and we are headed towards the big scary R word and a rebuild, and then there'll probably be lots of spots for these kids, or things actually worked out and the offseason came together as we all hoped it would, and 2025 is fielding a successful team that is looking to bolster at the trade deadline, and then maybe they're good chips to bring in whatever holes this team has at that moment.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, we know injuries are inevitable. Guys are going to get hurt, and you want to have that depth down in the minor league system, which is something that this team has not really had for a few years here now. So yeah, you're in a situation where you want to make sure you're covered when those injuries do occur. But I think it's just this logjam of guys that are all either AAA or quad A guys, and I don't mean that in that they're not major league players, but you just don't have any spots for them right now at the major league roster. And as you said, the spots on that MLB team are filling up quick. Out of all the guys that I think we saw last year, and I already kind of referenced him, but I think Ernie Clement is the one guy
Mhm.
I think that is locked in right now for a spot with the major league club heading into next season. And whether that's the everyday third baseman or just a utility guy that's moving to third, second, short, wherever they need him. I just think I saw enough from him last year that this is a guy that doesn't need to go to AAA. I don't know
Yeah.
if he's a guy you want to trade either because he is so valuable, playing in all these different positions. He's a guy that can run, put the bat on the ball, showed a little bit of pop last year. Like I think this is the perfect type of utility man that you want to have on your team. So
Yeah.
we didn't even mention Leo Jimenez as another
No, it's
guy.
so funny. I
So
had just
there's
thought
so
that
many of
too.
these
Yeah.
dudes. Yeah.
Yeah, and Leo's a guy who I'm really high on. Like I know I've told you this a couple times, but I was lucky enough to get to go down to Buffalo and cover the Bison last summer, and he was a guy who stood out as just like can handle the bat, incredibly intelligent as a ball player, all out all the time. And there's something really desirable about that in a guy, and he's 23. So again, Jimenez and Bo really block him from being there, and then you got Ernie as your utility guy. Again, we kind of touched on it already, but a trade could be coming. It's funny. I all of the grounds crew here, so that's what we call our listeners, but they were busting my balls all week because last week on the podcast, I was like, Ernie Clement's got to be the guy who has a spot. He's earned the right to be the new Kevin Biggio. And they're like, oh, don't do that to him. But he does. He fits right in where Kevin was.
Yeah, he absolutely does. And, I did say before that he had his one great year last year, which we hadn't seen him previously do, but, he had made changes. A lot of different things that he did when he came to the Blue Jays organization he wasn't doing before. So they've made mechanical changes. They've made different things with his approach to get him to where he is now. So he's been one of the great success stories of this organization. I can still remember when they first called him up and everybody was like, why are you calling up this guy? Like you look at his career numbers, really hadn't done much. And now I
Yeah,
think, the fan base is totally in love with this guy. I think it'd be tough for people to watch him get moved out. I know it was tough for
for
fans
sure.
to see Spencer Horwitz get dealt. So, if it's a situation where David Schneider and Ernie Clement, the roommates, everybody
Hmm.
knows them as, of course, I think that would be tough to see. But I think for me, if I'm the Blue Jays, Ernie Clement, he's staying on the major league roster in some capacity.
Rob, I always love talking baseball with you, man. I really do appreciate you making some time and coming on the show again. I'll leave you with one last little thing to chat about here. One last question. I know Jeff Passan just tweeted out, obviously the Hall of Fame had their inductees in Wagner and Sabathia and Ichiro. So this is all-time highest baseball Hall of Fame voting percentages. So obviously Mariano Rivera, the only unanimous first ballot Hall of Famer, 100%. Derek Jeter was 99.7% missing out by one vote. Same with newly inducted Ichiro Suzuki. And I want your opinion on that. I know that in the end, a Hall of Famer is a Hall of Famer, and the tier shit they do is really quite irrelevant. But if there's ever been a guy who should be a unanimous Hall of Famer on the first ballot, it feels like it should be Ichiro Suzuki. I'm curious your thoughts on the Baseball Writers of America and how much power they have over the Hall of Fame. And just if you like that one curmudgeon can be like, I don't like that he didn't win a World Series. He's going to have to wait.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up because I've been thinking about this for the last little bit here, ever since we saw what happened to Ichiro yesterday with the voting, and my views have kind of changed throughout my baseball fandom. Like when I was a kid, I'm sure you were the same as well, and you're learning about Hall of Famers and you're hearing about these announcements. when you're growing up, you don't have the knowledge. You didn't live, through watching a lot of these
Hmm.
players. So, you know, seeing that they're in the Hall of Fame lets you know that, wow, these were some special players. They are in the Hall of Fame because they were exceptional talents in their day. I never saw Mickey Mantle, but you telling me he's in the Hall of Fame, I know this guy was pretty good for whatever reason. And then the more you learn about him, you understand why. But now that I've gotten to the point, and I'm curious if you feel the same way, where you like to think you've got more knowledge about the game, whether it's through watching it with your own eyes or through statistical analysis. And this is no slight to people that vote on the Hall of Fame. They obviously have a duty to do. But and the honor means a lot to these players, as we see every year. I mean, Billy Wagner, a guy that's been waiting for a while, and he just missed out
Hmm.
last year. And we see how he reacted when he finally got in. But for me, as a fan of the game and as an observer of the game, I don't need to know like who's in the Hall of Fame. Like I just with my own eyes or just looking through stats, I know who's good and I
Hmm.
know who the greats of the game are. And we could spend obviously hours debating the merits of guys like Barry Bonds or Alex Rodriguez or even a guy like Pete Rose, of course. But I think for myself, I feel as though I know enough about the game of baseball now that I don't need to see a plaque of someone to know if they were a great baseball player or not. There's so many great players that their WAR is much higher than guys that are in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, well, why isn't that guy there? Because someone said he shouldn't be there. It's pretty clear when you look at the numbers. I think I've seen people talk about it, like Lou Whitaker, who put up like 75 WAR over his career, is not in there. But you've got guys that are much lower that are in there. So to me, it's like, okay, does that really matter if they have the plaque or not? Like Lou Whitaker, he should be a Hall of Famer. He's not, but I know he's a great player. So in the end, the Hall of Fame is a museum to me,
Yeah.
and it's just to showcase the history of the game. But I don't need an induction ceremony, or I don't need writers to be like, this guy's a Hall of Famer in my opinion, so you should feel as though he's a Hall of Famer. Like I just don't view it that way anymore. I think it's a great honor for these guys. They clearly, think highly of it, and you think about their post career. I mean, some guys even when they sign autographs, right? They get paid more because they can write HOF
Yeah.
on their baseballs or whatever the memorabilia. So there's obviously value to it. But just as a fan, like I just not that I don't have interest anymore, but when I think about it, it just doesn't really move me one way or another. Like I know each year
You're
was a Hall of
so
Famer. You telling
zen,
me
Rob.
doesn't mean anything. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just at the point now where I think it's awesome, but I don't need someone telling me someone's a Hall of Famer, whether it's 99% or 100%. I know he's good. So yeah, that's all I need to say.
I truly love that way of looking at it. And for the most part, that's honestly how I feel too. I found myself frustrated with the Ichiro stuff for the first time in so long with the Hall of Fame because I'd kind of come to the point where I was like, listen, the Hall of Fame, they're never gonna make you happy. There's always gonna be some weirdness to it, and don't let yourself get upset about a museum. That's literally my normal take. But I guess like Achiro was just like such a big part of me falling back in love with baseball. Cause I mean, I was like 10 and 11 when the Blue Jays won the World Series. And, like I was just a diehard fan. And then as after the strike hit, and that really hurt my fandom. And then it just like the Jays just weren't a good team. But that 2000 Seattle Mariners team, I was 18 and it's just like, I was living in Western Canada at the time. So there's a ton of Mariners fans. And I just got sucked right in from this like slap hitter, 27-year-old rookie from out of Seattle or out of Japan who comes to Seattle, puts them on the map, even though they had like Griffey and A-Rod and all these like talents that they couldn't quite get over that hump. And then in comes Ichiro. They win 116 games, and it was just like so mind blowing. So when I'm like, I see that one holdout, And it does, and I know I shouldn't. I should be Rob Wong's end, but I'm just like, oh, you son of a bee.
I mean, look, I can't say that it doesn't make me feel a certain way. I think I even felt it when, it happened to Jeter. And I
Yeah.
know, he's a New York Yankee. He's hated by a lot of people out there, but it's undeniable that he's a Hall of Famer. And it stunned me, to be honest, that one person felt to not include him to go in as a unanimous Hall of Famer. But I'm just in the spot now where, it's cool to hear about who's getting in, but it doesn't affect how I feel about these athletes and what they've accomplished in their career. Cece Sabathia, another example, great career.
Mhm.
Do I, if this was me 10 years ago, do I think he's a Hall of Famer? Probably, but do I think is he one of the, top 20 pitchers I've ever seen in my entire life? Probably not.
Yeah.
But he's a Hall of Famer. So it's a designation. It's a museum. It's great that these guys get to, partake in this. They work their whole lives for this thing, so they should be honored that way. But just for me as a baseball fan, it just does not really make me, look at these players any differently.
Rob, cannot thank you enough for taking the time to come back on the show, man. Always love talking baseball with you, and I hope that maybe I can bug you again down the road here, and we can chat in the springs once the teams kind of come together.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait for it.